Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Ayin Av contains three pretty separate sugyas. The first sugya is about the karbanos called Shalmei Simcha, special karbanos brought on Yom Tov to bring Simcha by eating the meat of those karbanos. Can they be actually shechted and brought on Erev Yom Tov? The next sugya is about the emurim, the parts of a carbon that go on the mizbeach. So the chagiga, the carbon chagiga of a Yom Tov, how long are you allowed to keep the emurim off the mizbeach, off the fire? By when does it have to be on there? Does it have to be on by that night, or do you have until the next day as well? Then the daf ends with a mishnah. The mishnah goes to the subject of a carbon Pesach with a psul that was brought on Shabbos. Did you violate an Isser Shabbos? Do you have to bring a carbon chatas for violating an Isser Daraisa b'shegig or not? So first of all, as we shall recall, there are four possible different types of karbanos related to Yom Tov, on specifically the Yom Tov of Pesach. One is the carbon Pesach itself that we know is brought on Erev Pesach. It has to be eaten, it has to be finished by daybreak. You have only till the morning. According to one opinion, which the Gemara will bring, you have only until chatzos, till midnight of that night. Then, besides for that, you have two carbon chagigas, one which is brought on the 14th, on Erev Pesach, one which is brought on the 15th, that's on Pesach itself. And besides that, you have something called Shalmei Simcha, that's a carbon shlamim. When the Torah tells us that you're supposed to have simcha on Yom Tov, it's telling you you're supposed to eat meat, and the eating of that meat is in a carbon shlamim. You bring the carbon shlamim, and then the owners can eat the meat within Yerushalayim. Now that is a simcha yom. That's a carbon for simcha that can be brought anytime on Yom Tov, possibly more than one on Yom Tov. Now all of these are a carbon shlamim. They all work as a carbon shlamim. So the Gemara first says as follows. It quotes Ula saying the name of Rabbi Elazar. And a different version of the same thing we will have is brought by Rav Avin in the name of Rabbi Elazar. So they're discussing what happens. You want to bring a carbon shlamim. You have an animal which is already set aside as a carbon shlamim. You want to use that to fulfill the chiyuv of the carbon chagiga or the chiyuv of shalmei simcha. Which are you allowed to use a carbon shlamim for that? So they both agree you definitely can't use it for the chagiga. The halacha is that the carbon chagiga has to come from something which is not hektish yet. You have to set it aside specifically for the carbon chagiga. It has to be something that belongs to you, not to hektish. They argue about, can you use a carbon shlamim that you shechted already before Yom Tov? Can you use that as a shalmei simcha? According to Ula's version of Rabbi Elazar, you can't. You cannot shech shalmei simcha before Yom Tov. They're only allowed to be shechted on Yom Tov itself. That's derived from the pasuk that describes shalmei simcha. It says v'zavachta shlamim v'achalta sham v'samachta lifnei Hashem lekecha. It says v'zavachta v'samachta. Those two are linked. You can only do v'zavachta, which is the shechita of the carbon when it's already v'samachta, when it's already on Yom Tov, the time of being happy. According to Ravin, quoting Rabbi Elazar, that is not accurate. We don't have that drasha. You're allowed to shech the shalmei simcha before Yom Tov, and you'll eat the meat of that carbon shlamim on Yom Tov, and you'll be mekayim the mitzvah of shalmei simcha. Now the Gemara begins. The Gemara discusses by bringing three proofs or kashas on the subject. The first one will be a proof that you cannot shecht the carbon shalmei simcha before Yom Tov. That'll be therefore a support for Ula and a kasha on Ravin. And the Gemara will say that there's an answer, which therefore takes off the proof and the kasha. So, what's the proof of the kasha? So, it's from the psukim discussing Sukkos. On Sukkos it says, V'samachta, l'fnei Hashem lekecha shivas yamim, you should have simcha 7 days. And then again, it says, shivas yamim t'chag Hashem lekecha, and at the end it says, v'yisa ach sameach. So, it says 7 days you're supposed to have simcha. It says that twice. So, why does it say the second time? So the Gemara says that the second time is meant to add for us the halacha that there's another time when you're supposed to have a carbon shalmei simcha besides for the 7 days of Yom Tov. And the Gemara quotes a brisa which says that is the last night of Yom Tov, which is already the night of Shmini Atzeres. You have extra mitzvah of simcha then also, not only the 7 days which we discussed. So Gemara says, so how do you know that it's supposed to be the last night? Maybe we're using it to include the first night. Now, first night generally wouldn't be included because you're only going to bring the carbon shalmei simcha during the first day of Yom Tov. So the night which precedes that is already Yom Tov, which you don't have a shalmei simcha yet. So Gemara says, why don't you say that it's to include that there's a mitzvah of Shalmei Simcha then? You should have a carbon then. Obviously, you can't say that it's for then, because the only way to get a Shalmei Simcha then is to shecht it before Yom Tov. And it's the proof that you cannot shecht Shalmei Simcha before Yom Tov. Gemara says, not necessarily. Could be a different reason why we didn't want to say that it's going on the first night. Maybe we just want to say that it's going on the last night because it's following the 7 days of Simcha. Well, we have the Torah specifically says 7 days of Simcha, and then it says an inclusion, right? It says an extra Simcha. So that means we're adding a day that follows, not a day that precedes. More likely to add something on at the end than to add something on the beginning. Therefore, there's no proof or kasha to either position. Okay, now the Gemara tries another kasha. This one shows that you are allowed to shach Shalmei Simcha before Yom Tov. It's from a brisa which we saw on Daf Ayin. The brisa says that the carbon chagiga of Erev Pesach can be used as a carbon Shalmei Simcha. Well, in a second, the carbon chagiga of Erev Pesach can be used as a Shalmei Simcha. That clearly shows that even though you shechted it on Erev Pesach, you're allowed to use it for Shalmei Simcha, so you can shech before Pesach. The rest is no. We said the carbon chagiga of Erev Pesach. We don't mean you shechted it on Erev Pesach. We mean you set it aside while it's alive to be a carbon chagiga for Erev Pesach, and you didn't end up using it, then you can shecht it on Yom Tov and use it for Shalmei Simcha. But of course, the shechita of Shalmei Simcha has to be on Yom Tov itself. I'll prove to you that this is the pshat, because as we said on Daf Ayin, the author of this brisa is Ben Tema, and Ben Tema says you only have 1 day and night to eat that carbon. Well, if you only have 1 day and night to eat the carbon, and you shechted it on Erev Pesach, you ain't going to use it for Shalmei Simcha because it's done by morning. So you don't even have it around for the day of Yom Tov at all for Shalmei Simcha. It obviously has to be referring to where you shechted it on Yom Tov, on the first day of Yom Tov, not before. And when we say that it's a carbon chagiga of the 14th, we mean that it was set aside originally to be in that position. Again, now the Gemara's third proof. Rava says that quoting the halachos of Simcha on Sukkot, it says that Halo and Simcha is 8 days, all 8 days, 7 days of Sukkot, and one day Shemini Atzeres is a mitzvah of saying Halo and a mitzvah of Simcha. So says Rava, how do you have Simcha all 8 days? What happens if the first day of Yom Tov is a Shabbos? You can't bring a carbon Shalmei Simcha on Shabbos. So that whole day, you won't have any Simcha. Must be that you're allowed to bring the carbon Shalmei Simcha before Yom Tov. So if the first day is a Shabbos, you bring the carbon before Yom Tov, and then you'll have the meat of that carbon for the first day, so you'll have 8 days. So Gemara says, not necessarily. Maybe when it says that you have Simcha, it's not talking about the Shalmei Simcha there. You could use the carbon chatas. There's a carbon chatas that's brought on Sukkot. That can be brought even on Shabbos. You eat the meat of the carbon chatas. Gemara says, eat the meat of the carbon chatas. First of all, only kahanim eat that meat, so not Simcha for everybody else. Second of all, you're not allowed to roast the carbon chatas on Shabbos. So you're going to have to eat that meat raw. It's not very simchadik. It doesn't bring much joy to eat raw meat, especially if you have a carbon chatas. So Gemara therefore says no. So when we say Simchas all days, we're not referring to eating meat at all. We're referring to the Simcha of drinking good wine and having fresh, clean, new clothing. Okay, that concludes the Gemara's discussion. The Gemara just fills in the last version of Rav here, which we discussed earlier. Now the Gemara brings a new halacha said by Rav Kahana, which will wrap back around to this discussion as well. Rav Kahana says, what's the halacha about the imurin, the parts that go on the mizbeach, of the carbon chagiga brought on the first day of Yom Tov, on the 15th of the month of Nisan? When does those imurim have to be on the mizbeach? We know that it's got to be on the mizbeach by morning. You have the whole night to put it up, but is it the next morning? It's got to be up there by the morning of the 16th? Or do you have until the following morning? It's got to be up there by the morning of the 17th. And then you would have from the Shechita on the 15th, the rest of that day, the night, the whole following day, which is the 16th, the following night, until the morning of the 17th. So he says, that's not it. It's got to be on there by the morning of the 16th. You only have 1 day and night to get those imurin on the mizbeach. How do you know? Because the pasuk says, "Lo yolen chaylev chagi ad boiker." I shouldn't leave the fats of my carbon until the morning. And the next pasuk says, "Reishis b'kur ad mascha tavi beis Hashem lakacha." It's talking about bikurim. It's got nothing to do with this. But the first word is reishis. So we read it together. Lo yolen chaylev chagi ad boiker reishis. Don't leave it until the first morning. And that's to tell me that it's the first morning. It's the morning of the 16th of Nisan that you have to get that chaylev up there. So Gemara says, but why would you think otherwise? if you would think that it could be there until the 17th, then you come up with a strange halacha. It comes up that the meat of the carbon chagiga could be eaten for 2 days and a night, so it could be eaten the 15th, the night, and then the 16th. And that's by nightfall of the 16th you have to stop eating the meat. But the chaylev doesn't have to go up there until the next morning. Where do you ever find such a thing? The chaylev could stay off the mizbeach longer than you could eat it? So Gemara says, yes, we do find such a thing. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah holds that the Korban Pesach he can only eat until Chatzos, but we know that the Emurim could put on Mizbeach until the morning. The Gemara says, this is what I meant to ask. Concerning the meat of the Korban Chagiga, if it would have just said until the morning, Ad HaBoiker, that would teach me that you have only one morning, till the next morning. You don't have till the following morning. As we shall see, that's not necessarily the halacha. But if it would just say Ad HaBoiker, you would have until the one morning. So why, when you're talking about the chaylev, if we just say Ad HaBoiker, you would tell me, oh, maybe it means the second morning. But it says Ad Boiker Rashis, that means the first morning. What does a stam boiker mean when it says until a boiker, until the morning? What does that mean? By the meat, it's clear to us that means the first morning, not the second morning. So how come for the emurin, which is stricter, you were willing to consider the possibility that it gives you till the second following morning, and only because it says boiker Rashis do you say it's the first morning? That's my kasha, and all you have to do is show you what I'm talking about. Where do you see that a stam and boiker concerning the eating of the meat means the first morning? So here the Gemara enters into a confusing discussion. The Gemara itself seems to express confusion as to what it meant, what one person said to the other. But what we wind up with is the following drasha. Concerning, there's two chagigas, right? There's the chagiga brought on the 14th of Nisan and the chagiga brought on the 15th of Nisan. How long do they each have? So the Gemara, for the pasuk describing the chagiga says, "V'layolim min abasar asher tizbach ba'erev ba'yoyim harishain la b'ker." You shouldn't leave over from the carbon which you're going to shecht ba'erev. Seems to imply erev Pesach ba'yoyim harishain on the first day until the morning. How do you read that? How do you understand that? So the Gemara wants to say that it sounds like what it says. You have a Yom Harishon, you have a first day, and then you have a Boiker. Then you have a morning that follows that. That means that you could leave something over until the morning following the first day of Yom Tov. First day of Yom Tov was the 15th of Nisan. So you could leave something over until the 16th, the morning of the 16th. That's the deadline for something. So now, if it's talking about the Karban Chagiga that's brought on the 14th, so that means I have a second morning. I have all day 14th, 15th, and then it's got to be finished by the morning of the 16th. That's 2 days. So Gemara says that would be fine if we were talking about the Karban of the 14th, but I could learn this very differently. I could read this as referring to two separate karbanos, and read it as follows: you shouldn't leave anything over from the carbon which you're going to shecht ba'erev. Ba'erev is erev Pesach. That's talking about the carbon chagiga for the 14th. You shouldn't leave anything over. How long shouldn't you leave it? Doesn't say. You would go with the standard pshat. It says don't leave over. It means don't leave over past the morning. Fine, you have one morning. Then the next thing it says is Bayom Harishain La Boiker. The carbon that you're going to bring on Bayom Harishain, which is the first day of Pesach, that's the 15th of Nisan, that's the second Chagiga, that you have until La Boiker, you have until the morning. And if you read it this way, so it comes out that both karbanos have just one morning. You got to finish it by the morning that follows. It says, that's talking about Erev Pesach 14th, you have until standard lean until the morning. And then the next one says, the one you're going to bring on the first day of Yom Tov, you have until the morning. Both of them you have one at a day. So Gemara says, this can't be correct, because you have a drasha in a whole different pasuk talking about a carbon neder and a dava. It says, V'im neder oin dava. It didn't have to, there's an extra word there, V'im, and it didn't have to say oinadava, it could have said vinadava. So there's an extra word here, and here you have the halachos of noiser spelled out. This is teaching me that there is some limud to some other carbon where you have an extra time, so you have 2 days and a night. You have until the second morning, until you have to finish eating it, and afterwards it becomes noiser. Now that's referring, says the Gemara, to some carbon chagiga. Question is, which carbon chagiga? The way we want to understand these psukim, there is no carbon chagiga that it could be referring to, because both of them have to be finished by the first morning. So therefore we have to reinterpret the way we read this pasuk, and it can't be talking about two different karbanas. One of these karbanas has to go for 2 mornings. Now, which is it? The more likely candidate is the one that's brought on Yom Tov, the second carbon chagiga, which is brought on the 15th of Nisan on Yom Tov. Why is that more likely, because that has much more lenient halachas, doesn't have all the restrictions that the first one has. The first one has a lot of the restrictions of the Korban Pesach itself that it's brought together with. So it's probably referring to that one. But if it's referring to that one, you have a problem, because the way we wanted to read the pasuk that is talking about 2 karbanos, the second phrase is by Yom Harishan La Baiker. It says that the carbon you're bringing on the Yom Harishan, which is this carbon you're saying now goes for 2 days, it says La Baiker. It says you only get one. So you see that it's got to be finished by the morning. So that can't be the one that's going for 2 days. So it has to be that the one that goes for 2 days is the first one, the first chakika, the one that's brought on Yadalit. Well, it's the one that's brought on Yadalit. Then how do you read that? Again, you have to reread the pasuk to fit. Obviously, this split reading of the pasuk referring to 2 different karbanos doesn't work. It's got to be one combined reading. It's referring to the carbon of Yudalid, and it's not referring to 2 karbanos. And then you read it normally. You shouldn't leave over from the meat which you bring ba'erev, that's Erev Pesach, the 14th. You shouldn't leave that over for the day and the following morning. Good. That's how we learn the halachos of the Karban Chiga. Now, what do we see over here? We see that if it would just say La Boiker, it would refer to one morning. The only reason why it says, why we learn that's referring to a second morning, is because we now are reading it, you shouldn't leave it over by Yom Harishan La Boiker, with a first day and then a morning after that. That means standard, without anything. If it would just say La Boiker till the morning, it would mean the first morning. So now that's my kasha. Why do you have to say in your limud about the emurim, why do you have to have the word rachis in there? Let's say that La Boiker, rachis. Even without the word rachis, standard Boiker means the first morning. The Gemara leaves the kasha, the Gemara doesn't answer it. And now we get to the Mishnah, which discusses the halacha of what happens when the Korban Pesach that you're bringing on Shabbos is puzzle for some reason. Now, generally the rule is if you violate Hilchos Shabbos in an Issa D'Oraisa by accident, you make a mistake on Shabbos, you have to bring a Korban Chatas. So Gemara differentiates, the Mishnah differentiates between 2 types of mistakes. A shoygeg is where you forgot a Shabbos, you forgot that this is Aser. That's a mistake, that's a shoygeg. You got to bring a Korban Chatas for that. There's something else called a toye bidvar mitzvah. There's a guy, he didn't forget it's Shabbos, he didn't forget that it's, that this is Aser. He got confused. He was trying to do a mitzvah, it was complicated, he was involved. He made a mistake, but it's not a real shoygeg. It's lighter than that. It's an error. It's a toya. He slipped. Something like that is a machlokes. So the Gemara discusses the case as follows. Somebody brings a carbon Pesach, but he has in mind for a different carbon. So he thought he allowed to bring it on Pesach. You're not allowed. It's therefore it's a puzzle carbon Pesach. It's a different carbon, and you're not allowed to bring that carbon on Shabbos. And therefore you violated Shabbos, you have to bring carbon chatas. Let's say he brings a different carbon as a carbon Pesach. So let's see, could it be a carbon Pesach or not? If it's a type of animal that can never be a carbon Pesach, like it's a cow, or it's a female, or it's too old, so then the person didn't just make a mistake in a dvar mitzvah. That's a shoygeg. He thought I'm allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do it. If it got a Shabbos, if it got a Tzas, or whatever it is, there is chayav chatas. The problem is if he's bringing a different carbon and he's bringing a carbon Pesach, and it could have been a carbon Pesach, but it has a psul now. So the question is, what is that? So here you have a machlekes. Rabbi Eliezer says chayav chatas. This is a regular shoygeg, no problem. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, this is a toyeh b'dvar mitzvah. The guy's trying to do a mitzvah, he slipped up, he made a mistake, he brought a wrong carbon, he took the wrong animal, he found an animal, he thought it was a carbon Pesach, it really wasn't. For a carbon Pesach, in the halachos of carbon Pesach, if you bring a different animal, if you bring an animal that's set aside to be a different carbon, you bring that as a carbon Pesach, that is a psul, but you're not going to be chayav chatas for this because he's a toyeh b'dvar mitzvah. He slipped, he made a mistake. Now the Mishnah records a conversation between the Tanaim. So Rabbi Yeshua brought a proof to his own position. Rabbi Eliezer first brought a proof to his own position. He said, look, the carbon Pesach you're allowed to bring, but if you bring it for the wrong name, you bring it for something else, yichayev. That we all agree on, right? For that you have to bring a carbon chatas. So you bring a carbon Pesach which you're allowed to bring, but you do it wrongly, then you have to bring a carbon chatas. So a different carbon which you're not allowed to bring, and then you do it wrongly, you do it l'shem carbon Pesach. So for sure, that's a carbon you're not allowed to bring, plus it's done wrongly. For sure, you should be chayav chatas for that. Rabbi Shua said, no. But here, doing it wrongly makes it better, because you did it l'shem Pesach, which is something you're allowed to bring. So you took a carbon which you're not allowed to bring, and you brought it for a carbon that you are allowed to bring. So here, you're not making it worse by this mistake, you're making it better by this mistake. Gemara says, no. But let's say he brought it l'shem a carbon tamid, or carbon musaf, which you're allowed to bring on Shabbos. So he's bringing it l'shem something you're allowed to bring. Still, he has to bring a chatas. That we all agree on. So that's not an answer. The fact that you're allowed to bring it, that he brought it for a name is something you're allowed to bring, that's not a good reason. Because if you would bring it for a tamid or a musaf, you would still say that he has a carbon chatas. So Gemara offers, the Mishnah offers two rejections to that position. Rabbi Shua says that's not a proof, because a tamid and a musaf, there's only one tamid in the morning, one in the afternoon. There's two musafim, a very limited amount of those. And there's no reason you should make a mistake. You see an animal like that, you shouldn't think, oh, that's a tamid, let me go bring that. There's one tamid brought. You know if you brought it, if you didn't bring it, that's it. Korban Pesach, there's hundreds of them, there's thousands of them all over the place. People make mistakes, that I can understand, and therefore it makes sense that he's a toyah b'dvar mitzvah, and he shouldn't have to bring a carbon for that. Interestingly, the Mishnah adds here, Rabbi Meir says, even if he shechts, actually, he takes the carbon Pesach and he shechts it as a tamid or a musaf, he doesn't have to bring carbon chatas for that. That doesn't violate the problem at all. That's not an actual isser. That would still be okay. Okay, the Mishnah now moves on to the other psulim of a carbon Pesach. You shechted it for people who can't eat it, that is, who are old or too sick, people who are not part of the group, they're not signing up to the Chabura, people who don't have a bris milah, or people who are tamei. Any of these, if these are the only people that you shechted it for, it's pasul, and therefore you chayav chatas. If there were other people besides for them, then it's kasher, because at least it's okay for those people, and you're not chayav anything. Next psul is if you shechted and it turns out that it had a mum. So again, you're chayav chatas for that. You should have checked and seen that it has a mum. That's a psul. You should make sure that's something you can check beforehand. If, however, you shechted and you find that in its internal organs it's treif, it has a disease which makes it not kosher, you couldn't have known that beforehand, and therefore you're not a shaygig, you're an oinis, so you're potter for that. If you shechted and then you found out that the owners were gone at the time of shechita, either that they withdrew from the carbon, or they died, or they became tamei, that's not your problem. You couldn't have known that, and therefore
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.